I still remember the exact moment my daughter-in-law decided to humiliate me in front of 200 guests at my own son's wedding. And what hurt the most was not what she did, but the fact that my son stood there and let it happen. The ballroom at the Lakeside Grand Hotel smelled like roasted chicken, butter, and fresh flowers, the kind of place people in our town only rented for the most important days of their lives. And I had paid for every single detail of it, from the crystal centerpieces to the five-tier cake that stood in the middle of the room like a monument to a future I thought I was helping build. I had arrived early that afternoon wearing the navy blue dress my late husband used to say made me look elegant, the same dress I had worn to Daniel's college graduation 15 years ago, back when he still hugged me in public without looking over his shoulder first, back when I believed that no matter who he married, he would never forget who stayed up nights working double shifts to pay his tuition. The wedding planner greeted me with a polite smile that felt just a little too formal, as if she wasn't sure whether to treat me like family or like a client, and I told myself I was imagining things, because weddings make everyone nervous, especially mothers, especially widows who sit alone at the table during rehearsals where there used to be 2 chairs. Ashley arrived a few minutes later in a cloud of perfume and perfectly styled blonde hair, holding her phone in one hand and a clipboard in the other, giving orders to the caterer as if she owned the place. And when she saw me, she gave that tight smile she always used, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Margaret, you made it early," she said, her voice sweet enough that anyone else would have thought she was being kind. But I had learned over the last 2 years that sweetness from Ashley usually meant I was about to be reminded that I didn't belong. I told her I wanted to make sure everything looked right for Daniel, and she nodded without really listening, already turning back to the staff, already acting as if I were just another guest who happened to arrive too soon. I should have known then that something wasn't right, because I noticed my name wasn't on the seating chart near the head table, and when I asked the coordinator about it, she hesitated for a second before telling me they were still making a few last-minute adjustments, the kind of polite answer people give when they don't want to explain a decision that wasn't theirs. I told myself not to be sensitive, that weddings are chaotic, that Ashley was stressed, that Daniel loved me, and that by the end of the night we would all be laughing together the way families are supposed to laugh at weddings. The ceremony itself was beautiful, the kind of perfect outdoor sunset wedding people save pictures of for the rest of their lives. And when Daniel said his vows, I felt my throat tighten, because for a moment I saw the little boy who used to run across the yard with grass stains on his knees, the boy who once told me I was the strongest person he knew, the boy who promised he would always take care of me when I got old. After the ceremony, the guests moved into the ballroom for the reception, music playing, glasses clinking, people congratulating Ashley and Daniel like they were the start of something perfect, and I stood near the buffet table waiting for someone to tell me where I should sit, holding the small envelope in my purse that contained the final check for the wedding expenses, the last payment I had insisted on making because I wanted my son to start his marriage without debt, the same way his father and I had started ours. I saw Ashley whisper something to one of her bridesmaids, and they both glanced in my direction before laughing quietly. And again I told myself I was imagining things, because no mother wants to believe she's not welcome at her own child's wedding. The caterers brought out the dinner trays, steam rising from the mashed potatoes and gravy, the smell of butter filling the air, and people began lining up with their plates, smiling, talking, celebrating. And for a moment, I thought maybe the strange feeling in my chest was just nerves, just the sadness that comes with watching your child begin a life that no longer needs you the way it used to. Ashley walked toward me then, still smiling, still holding that perfect posture she practiced in front of mirrors, and she picked up a serving spoon from the buffet, as if she were about to help me fill my plate, and I remember thinking how nice it was that she was finally being friendly, how maybe all the distance between us had just been in my head. "You should try the mashed potatoes," she said loudly enough for the people nearby to hear, her voice playful, almost teasing, the way someone sounds when they're about to tell a joke at someone else's expense. And before I could answer, she leaned closer and added in a tone that only I could hear, "Go on, try it, old hag." A few guests turned toward us, smiling, waiting for whatever they thought was about to be a harmless moment of wedding humor. And I felt the room go strangely quiet inside my head, the music fading, the laughter sounding far away, because in that instant I realized something I should have understood long before that night, something that hurt more than any insult ever could. I realized that the woman standing in front of me wasn't nervous, and she wasn't stressed, and she wasn't joking. She was showing everyone exactly what she thought of me, and she was doing it in a room I had paid for, at a wedding I had helped build, right in front of the son who didn't say a single word to stop her. I stood there for a moment after she walked away, holding the empty plate in my hands as if I had forgotten why I picked it up in the first place. And I remember thinking how strange it was that a room full of people could feel so crowded and so empty at the same time. The music started again, the band playing one of those cheerful songs people always use at weddings, and guests returned to their conversations as if nothing unusual had happened, as if I had not just been reminded in the middle of the reception that I was no longer part of the picture they were celebrating. I placed the plate back on the table without taking any food, because my appetite had disappeared somewhere between Ashley's smile and the sound of a few quiet laughs from the people standing behind her, and I told myself to stay calm, to stay dignified, the same way my husband always used to tell me whenever something went wrong in public. He used to say that people reveal who they really are when they think no one important is watching, and that night I realized he had been right, because Ashley was not embarrassed, and Daniel was not angry, and no one rushed over to ask if I was all right. I walked slowly toward the side of the ballroom where the large windows overlooked the lake behind the hotel, needing a moment where no one was looking at me. And as I stood there, I could see my reflection in the glass, the navy dress, the silver hair, the small pearl necklace I had worn to every important family event for the last 20 years, and for the first time I wondered if I had become exactly what Ashley believed I was. An old woman standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, holding on to a role that no longer belonged to me. A waiter passed by carrying a tray of champagne glasses and asked politely if I would like one, and I almost said yes just to have something to hold, but I shook my head instead because I wanted my mind clearer than it had been in a long time, clear enough to notice the things I had ignored for months. I remembered the day Ashley told me she and Daniel wanted to handle the wedding planning themselves, saying it would be easier that way, even though I had offered to help with the deposits. I remembered the afternoon Daniel stopped by my house and casually mentioned that the venue cost more than they expected, and how quickly he changed the subject when I told him not to worry about it. I remembered the phone calls that became shorter after he got engaged, the holidays that felt rushed, the way Ashley always spoke to me politely, but never warmly, like a coworker you have to tolerate, but never invite to dinner. Standing there by the window, watching the lights reflect off the water outside, all those small moments lined up in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to finish, and the picture they formed was not the one I wanted to see. I reached into my purse without thinking and felt the edge of the envelope still resting there, the one with the final payment for the reception, the last check I had written that morning at my kitchen table, telling myself that helping my son start his marriage without financial stress was the least I could do after everything his father and I had worked for. I had even written a small note to put inside the card I planned to give him later that night. Something simple, something a mother says when she wants her child to know she is proud of him. And suddenly the thought of handing it to him felt heavier than the envelope itself. Across the room, I saw Daniel laughing with one of Ashley's relatives, his arm around his new wife, both of them smiling for a photo while the photographer adjusted the lights. And for a moment, I waited for him to look around the room the way he used to when he was younger, the way he always searched for me in the crowd after a school play or a baseball game, just to make sure I had seen him. He did not look. He did not even turn his head in my direction, and that hurt more than anything Ashley had said, because it meant this was not just her doing. This was a choice he had made too, even if he would never say it out loud. I took a slow breath, the kind you take when you realize that pretending everything is fine is harder than admitting it is not, and I told myself that the night was not over yet, that weddings are long, that people say foolish things when they are excited, that maybe I was reading too much into a moment that everyone else would forget by morning. But deep down, in that quiet place where a mother knows the truth before anyone says it, I had the feeling that this was only the beginning, and that whatever came next would show me exactly how much of my place in this family I had already lost. I stayed near the windows for a long time, long enough for the sky outside to turn from soft orange to deep blue, long enough for the lights in the ballroom to feel brighter than they should have, the kind of brightness that makes every smile look a little forced if you stare at it too carefully. People kept walking past me carrying plates, glasses, napkins, laughing the way guests always laugh at weddings when the music is loud and the drinks are free, and every now and then someone would nod politely in my direction, the way you acknowledge a stranger you think you should recognize but cannot quite place. I realized then that most of the people in the room were Ashley's friends, Ashley's relatives, Ashley's co-workers, people who knew her story, her family, her life, and who saw me as nothing more than the older woman standing near the wall in a navy dress who looked like she might be related to the groom, but was not important enough to ask. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected, because it made me remember another evening 2 months before the wedding, when Ashley told me they had decided to keep the guest list small and simple, just close friends and immediate family, and I had nodded and told her that sounded sensible. Even though the wedding my husband and I had dreamed about for Daniel when he was younger was always full of cousins, neighbors, and people who watched him grow up, I remembered how quickly that small and simple wedding turned into a reception for 200 guests the moment Ashley's parents started adding names, and how every time I offered to help with something, she would smile and say they already had it handled, that I should just relax and enjoy the day when it came. I should have noticed then that relaxing was her polite way of telling me to stay out of the way. A group of bridesmaids walked past me carrying their shoes in their hands, laughing about something that had happened during the ceremony, and one of them glanced at me and whispered something to the girl next to her before they both looked forward again, trying not to smile too obviously, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest that comes when you realize you have become the subject of a joke no one bothers to explain to you. I turned away from the window and slowly walked toward the table where the gift cards were stacked in neat rows, because I remembered the envelope in my purse and thought it might be better to leave it there. Now, instead of waiting for the right moment that never seemed to come, the table was covered in white cloth with a small sign that said cards and wishes in gold letters, the kind of detail Ashley loved, everything matching, everything perfect, everything looking like the pictures she saved on her phone for months before the wedding. I placed my hand on my purse but did not take the envelope out yet, because across the room I could hear Ashley's voice again, louder this time, telling someone that the reception would not have been possible without careful planning and a lot of sacrifice, and people around her nodded like she had built the whole evening herself. I waited for her to say something about Daniel, something about family, something about the people who helped them, but she just laughed and lifted her glass while her mother stood beside her smiling proudly, and for a moment I felt foolish for expecting anything different. Daniel joined them a second later, putting his arm around her shoulders, and one of Ashley's uncles asked him how they managed to afford such a beautiful place, and I watched my son hesitate just long enough for me to notice before he answered, saying they had saved for a long time and that it was worth every penny. He did not look toward me when he said it. He did not even glance at the gift table where I was standing with my hand still resting on my purse. Something inside me shifted then, not like a sudden break, but like a slow click, the kind of sound a lock makes when it turns and you realize the door you thought was open has been closed for a long time. I took the envelope out and held it in my hand, feeling the weight of the paper, remembering the morning I sat at my kitchen table writing the check while the coffee grew cold beside me, telling myself that helping my son start his life without debt was what any good mother would do. I looked at the gold letters on the sign again, cards and wishes, and I almost laughed at how simple that sounded, as if all a person ever needed to give their child was a card and a wish. Across the ballroom, Ashley raised her glass again and said something that made everyone around her laugh, and for the first time that night, I did not try to guess what the joke was about, because I had the feeling I already knew. I slid the envelope back into my purse, closed the clasp slowly, and told myself that there was no hurry anymore, because whatever was supposed to happen tonight had already begun, and before the music stopped and the lights went out, I was going to understand exactly why I had been invited to this wedding only to feel like I was the one person who did not belong there. I kept the purse in my hand instead of putting it back on the chair, because holding it gave me something to focus on while the noise of the reception kept rising and falling around me like waves I did not want to step into. The band switched to a slower song, one of those songs couples use for the first dances later in the night, and the lights dimmed slightly over the dance floor while the rest of the room stayed bright, making the edges of the ballroom feel like a place where people stood only when they had nowhere else to go. I moved a little farther from the gift table and sat down at one of the round tables near the wall, the kind of table reserved for guests who are not part of the main celebration but still need a place to sit. There was no name card in front of the chair, Just an empty plate, a folded napkin, and a glass of water that someone must have placed there earlier without knowing who would use it. I smoothed the front of my dress out of habit, the same way I used to do before every school meeting or church event when Daniel was younger, back when I believed that if I looked calm on the outside, everything else would stay in order too. Sitting there brought back a memory I had not thought about in years, the night Daniel left for college. When my husband and I stood in the driveway watching his car disappear at the end of the street, both of us smiling because we were proud, even though the house felt too quiet the moment the taillights were gone. My husband had put his arm around my shoulders and told me that one day Daniel would have a family of his own, and that our job was to make sure he started that life without the struggles we had when we were young. We kept that promise the best we could. We worked overtime, skipped vacations, fixed things ourselves instead of hiring anyone, and put money aside every month even when it would have been easier not to. After my husband passed away, I told myself that helping Daniel stand on his own feet was the last part of that promise, the last thing his father would have wanted me to do. And that thought was the reason I wrote the checks for the engagement party, the venue deposit, the caterer, the band, the photographer, and every other detail Ashley said would make the day perfect. I never asked for my name to be mentioned, never asked for a thank you in front of anyone, because I believe that family does not keep score. Family just shows up when it matters. A server came by and placed a small bread roll on the plate in front of me, not even looking at my face, just doing his job, and I realized that to everyone in that room, I looked exactly like what Ashley had called me earlier, an older guest sitting quietly at the edge of the reception, someone who should be grateful just to be invited. I picked up the roll but did not eat it, turning it slowly in my hands while I watched the dance floor where Ashley and Daniel were talking to the photographer, practicing where they were supposed to stand for the first dance. Ashley adjusted Daniel's tie and laughed about something, then said something else that made the photographer smile, and I saw the same confidence in her face that I had noticed from the beginning, the confidence of someone who believes the entire evening belongs to her. For the first time, I stopped wondering why she treated me the way she did and started asking myself a different question, one I should have asked long ago. I asked myself when exactly I had become so easy to ignore. The answer came back in pieces, in small moments I had pushed aside because I did not want to make trouble. The time Ashley told me they would handle the guest list. The time Daniel said they did not need help choosing the venue. The time I offered to host the rehearsal dinner, and Ashley said her parents had already planned something else. Each of those moments felt harmless at the time, just part of a young couple wanting to do things their own way, but sitting there in that chair with no name card in front of me, I could see that every decision had moved me a little farther from the center of their life until I ended up exactly where I was now, close enough to watch, but not close enough to matter. I set the bread back on the plate, wiped my hands on the napkin even though they were not dirty, and reached for my purse again without thinking. My fingers rested on the clasp for a second before I opened it, just enough to see the corner of the envelope inside. The same envelope I had planned to leave on the gift table with all the others, the one that held the final payment for the reception and a note I had written that morning telling Daniel how proud his father would have been of him today. I closed the purse again slowly and placed it on my lap, not because I had decided what to do, but because for the first time that night I felt certain that the decision I made next was going to matter more than any check I had written before. I sat there with the purse resting on my lap, my hand still on the clasp, listening to the sound of silverware and laughter moving through the room like nothing had changed, even though something inside me had already started to shift in a way I could not ignore anymore. A man at the next table asked if anyone had seen the groom, and another guest joked that newly married men always disappear right before the dancing starts, and the whole table laughed, the kind of easy laughter that belongs to people who feel comfortable where they are. I realized that I had not felt comfortable in that room once since the reception began, and the more I thought about it, the more I understood that the feeling did not start tonight. It started months ago, maybe even longer, in small moments I kept telling myself were not important enough to question. I remembered that afternoon Ashley came over with a stack of brochures for venues spread across my kitchen table, talking quickly about prices and packages and how weddings cost more than people expect, and how Daniel looked at me only once during that whole conversation, just long enough to see if I was going to offer help before he looked back down at the papers again. I had written the first check that same day without being asked, sliding it across the table with a smile, because I wanted them to know I believed in their future, and Ashley thanked me in that polite voice she used when she was talking to someone she did not plan to see often. After that, every expense seemed to appear the same way, always unexpected, always urgent, always followed by that same look from Daniel that said he was counting on me to make things easier. I told myself it was normal, that parents help their children, that this was what my husband and I had saved for, and every time I signed another check I imagined him standing beside me, nodding the way he used to when we agreed on something without needing to say it out loud. The band stopped playing for a moment while the announcer tested the microphone, and the sudden quiet made it easier to hear voices from the table behind me. Two women talking softly, but not softly enough. One of them said the reception must have cost a fortune, and the other answered that Ashley's parents could not have paid for something this big on their own, then laughed and said she heard the groom's mother had helped, because older women like that always want to feel important at their son's wedding. The first woman asked which one was the groom's mother, and there was a short pause before the second one said she was not sure. Maybe the woman in the blue dress sitting near the wall, or maybe the one who left earlier, because she had not seen anyone who looked like part of the main family. I kept my eyes on the table in front of me and did not turn around, because there was no reason to, and because I did not want them to know I had heard every word. Instead, I opened my purse again, slowly this time, and took the envelope out. Just enough to see my own handwriting on the front, Daniel and Ashley, written carefully the way I always wrote cards for birthdays and holidays, as if neat letters could make feelings easier to understand. I ran my thumb over the edge of the paper and thought about the note inside, the one where I told him that his father would have been proud of the man he had become, and for the first time that sentence did not feel as certain as it had that morning. Across the room, Ashley was talking to the wedding planner again, pointing toward the dance floor and then toward the head table, giving instructions with the confidence of someone who believed every detail would happen exactly the way she wanted. Daniel stood beside her, nodding, smiling, agreeing, and I noticed that he did not look tired or nervous the way grooms usually do. He looked comfortable, like a man who had already stepped into the life he wanted and did not feel the need to look back. I closed the purse halfway but did not put the envelope back inside, holding it in my hands while the announcer finally spoke into the microphone, asking everyone to take their seats because the first dance would begin in just a few minutes. People started moving toward the center of the room, chairs scraping softly against the floor, glasses clinking, voices lowering with that familiar excitement that comes right before a moment everyone wants to remember. I stayed where I was, the envelope resting in my hands, and for the first time since I walked into that ballroom, I stopped waiting for someone to come over and tell me where I belonged. Instead, I asked myself a question I had avoided all night, a question that felt heavier than the purse, heavier than the envelope, heavier than any check I had written. I asked myself what would happen if, just this once, I decided that belonging was not something anyone else got to decide for me. I did not move when everyone else stood up for the first dance, and that alone made me feel different from the rest of the room, as if I had quietly stepped out of the story they were all celebrating without anyone noticing. The announcer called Daniel and Ashley to the center of the floor, his voice cheerful and warm. The kind of voice people use when they want a moment to sound perfect, and the guests gathered closer with their phones ready, smiling, whispering, waiting for the music to begin. I stayed in my chair with the envelope resting in my hands, my fingers pressed against the paper as if I needed to remind myself that it was real, that everything I had done to make this night possible was still sitting right there in my lap. The lights dimmed over the tables and brightened over the dance floor, and when the first notes of the song started playing, everyone turned toward the couple at the same time, the way people always do when they want to witness something they believe will last forever. Daniel placed his hand on Ashley's waist, and she rested her head lightly against his shoulder, smiling up at him like the cameras were the only thing that mattered. And for a moment, I could see the boy he used to be, the boy who once asked me to stay up late so I could watch him practice for a school dance because he wanted to make sure he did not embarrass himself in front of his friends. Back then, he used to look at me after every step, waiting for approval, waiting for that small nod that told him everything was going to be fine. Tonight, he did not look in my direction even once. I watched them move slowly across the floor while the guests around me whispered about how beautiful the wedding was, how perfect everything looked, how lucky the couple was to start their life like this, and every word felt heavier than the last, because I knew how much of that perfection had come from years of work no one in that room had seen. I thought about the nights my husband and I sat at the kitchen table going over bills, promising each other that no matter how hard things got, we would make sure our son never had to struggle the way we did when we were young. I thought about the first savings account we opened in Daniel's name, the one we added to every month even when the balance grew slowly, because we believed that one day those small sacrifices would turn into something that mattered. After my husband passed away, I kept that promise alone, telling myself that finishing what we started was the only way to honor him. And every time I helped Daniel with something, I felt like I was keeping that promise alive. The music swelled and people around me began to clap softly, smiling at the couple as if the whole world had stopped just to watch them dance, and I realized that I had been holding my breath without knowing it. I let the air out slowly and looked down at the envelope again, tracing the edge of my handwriting with my thumb, remembering how carefully I had written their names that morning, wanting the letters to look steady even though my hands were not. I could still see my kitchen in my mind, the sunlight on the table, the coffee growing cold beside me while I finished the note inside, telling Daniel that his father would have been proud of him, telling him that family was not about money but about standing beside each other when it mattered. At the time, those words felt simple and true, the kind of thing you say without thinking because you believe everyone understands it the same way. Sitting there in the half-dark of the ballroom, watching my son dance with the woman who had looked at me like I was in the wrong place all night, I realized that not everyone hears those words the same way. Some people hear help and think obligation. Some people hear sacrifice and think permission. Some people hear love and think it will always be there no matter how they act. The song ended and the room filled with applause, loud and bright, and Ashley laughed as Daniel spun her once more before pulling her close, both of them smiling like nothing in the world could touch them. I joined the applause with everyone else, my hands moving slowly, my face calm, because I had learned a long time ago that the quietest reactions are often the ones people never see coming. When the clapping faded, the announcer started talking again about the next dance, about the schedule, about the rest of the evening, and people began returning to their tables, still smiling, still talking about how perfect everything felt. I placed the envelope back into my purse, but did not close the clasp right away, leaving it open just enough to remind myself that the night was not finished yet, and that before the music stopped and the lights came back on, I was going to decide exactly what that envelope meant, not to the wedding, not to the guests, but to me. I finally closed the clasp on my purse and set it on the table in front of me, not because I had made a decision yet, but because I understood that whatever I chose to do next had to come from a place that was calm, not from the tight feeling in my chest that had been building since the reception started. People were standing again, moving toward the dance floor for the next song, and the noise in the room rose back to the same cheerful level it had before, as if the night was following a script everyone else already knew. I stayed seated, watching the way the lights reflected off the glasses and the silverware, the way the waiters moved between tables with practiced smiles, the way Ashley laughed with her friends like the evening had gone exactly the way she wanted. Daniel walked past my table without noticing me at first, talking to one of his coworkers, his jacket already unbuttoned, his tie slightly loose the way it used to look after long days, when he came home from school and dropped his backpack by the door. For a second, I almost called his name out of habit, the way I did when he was younger and forgot something before leaving the house. But the sound never left my mouth because I realized I was not sure he would stop if I did. He kept walking until the man beside him pointed in my direction and said something I could not hear, and only then did Daniel turn his head. When our eyes met, he smiled quickly, the polite kind of smile people give when they realize they should have acknowledged someone sooner, and he walked over to the table with the same careful expression he used when he knew a conversation might take longer than he wanted. He asked if I was enjoying the reception, and I told him everything looked beautiful, because it did, and because I had spent most of my life choosing my words carefully when something mattered. He nodded and said they were glad everything came together, that planning a wedding was harder than he expected, and I could hear the pride in his voice, the pride of someone who believes he has built something with his own hands. I asked him if he was happy, and he said yes without hesitation, looking over his shoulder toward the dance floor where Ashley was talking to the photographer again, her arms moving as she explained something, her smile bright enough to be seen from across the room. He told me she had worked very hard to make the night perfect, And I said I could tell, because that was the truth too, even if it was not the whole truth. For a moment neither of us spoke, and the silence between us felt heavier than any argument ever could, because it was the kind of silence that comes when two people realize they are no longer standing in the same place. He glanced at the purse on the table and asked if that was the card I had mentioned earlier, the one I wanted to give them before the evening was over, and I told him yes, it was, but I had not decided when the right moment would be. He said there was no rush, that we had all night, and then he smiled again, the same quick smile, the same polite expression, before saying he needed to get back to Ashley because the photographer wanted them for another set of pictures. He thanked me for coming, the way you thank a guest who made the effort to show up, and then he walked away before I could answer, already looking toward the dance floor again, already part of a moment that did not seem to need me in it. I watched him go until the crowd moved between us, and I could not see him anymore, and then I looked down at the purse again, resting quietly on the table like it had all evening. I placed my hand on it and let my fingers stay there, feeling the shape of the envelope inside, remembering the years it had taken to make that simple piece of paper possible, remembering the promises my husband and I made to each other when life was harder than this, remembering the way we used to say that family was not something you talked about, it was something you proved. Around me the music started again, louder. This time, and people cheered as the next song began, the sound filling the ballroom until it felt like the walls themselves were part of the celebration. I sat there in the middle of all that noise and realized that the choice in front of me was not really about the envelope at all. It was about whether I was going to keep pretending that my place in this family was the same as it used to be, or whether I was finally ready to see the night exactly the way it was, without excuses, without hopes, without telling myself that things would feel different if I just waited a little longer. I did not open the purse right away after Daniel walked away, even though my hand stayed on it, as if the answer to everything inside that ballroom was waiting under the clasp. The music had grown louder again, the kind of music people use when they want the night to feel young no matter how late it gets, and the dance floor filled with guests who were laughing, spinning, raising their glasses, living inside a moment that would later become photographs on someone else's wall. I watched them for a long time without moving, letting the noise pass over me the way wind moves over water, until the feeling in my chest finally settled into something steady enough to think clearly. I realized then that the question I had been asking myself all evening was the wrong one. It was not about whether I belonged at that wedding. It was about whether I was going to keep acting like my place there depended on anyone else's approval. I picked up the purse and placed it on my lap again, opening it slowly, not because I was nervous anymore, but because I wanted to be certain of what I was doing. The envelope was exactly where it had been all night, the corner of the paper still slightly bent from when I first slid it inside that morning at my kitchen table. I took it out and held it in both hands, looking at the names written on the front, Daniel and Ashley, the same careful handwriting I had used every time I signed a birthday card, every time I sent a check to help him through college, every time I wanted him to know that no matter how old he got, he still had someone standing behind him. For a moment, I almost opened the envelope, not because I had forgotten what was inside, but because I wanted to see the note again, the one where I told him that his father would have been proud tonight. Instead, I turned the envelope over and ran my thumb along the sealed edge, remembering the way my husband used to say that once you close something, you should be sure you mean it, because opening it again never feels the same. A chair moved beside me, and I looked up to see one of the waiters placing fresh glasses on the table, preparing for the next round of toasts, and he nodded politely before moving on, not realizing that the small white envelope in my hands meant more to this reception than any of the decorations or the music or the expensive food. I glanced toward the head table where Ashley was talking to her parents, her hands moving as she told another story, her voice bright, confident, completely certain that the night belonged to her. Daniel stood beside her, smiling at something her father said, and for the first time I noticed how natural it looked, the way he fit into that circle without looking for me, without wondering where I was sitting, without needing to check that I was all right. The realization did not hurt the way I expected it to. It felt quieter than that, like the moment you finally understand something you have been trying not to see. I looked back down at the envelope and let out a slow breath, the kind you take when a decision has already been made somewhere inside you before your mind catches up. I slid the envelope back into the purse, but this time I did not leave the clasp open. I closed it firmly, the small clicks sounding louder to me than the music across the room, and rested my hands on top of it for a second, letting the feeling settle. Around me, the announcer began calling guests to gather closer for the next part of the reception, talking about speeches and memories and the beginning of a new life together. And people started moving again, chairs scraping, voices rising, the whole room shifting toward the center as if nothing in the world could interrupt the celebration. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my dress the way I always did before walking into a room where something important was about to happen, and picked up the purse from the table. For the first time that night, I did not look around to see if anyone was watching me. I did not wait for Daniel to notice where I was going. I did not look at Ashley to see if she cared. I simply turned toward the edge of the ballroom where the hallway led back toward the lobby, the same hallway I had walked through earlier with the feeling that I was arriving as a guest. As I started toward it now, the purse held firmly in my hand, I understood that I was not leaving because I had been pushed aside. I was leaving because I had finally decided that what I carried with me mattered more than anything they were celebrating on the other side of the room. I walked down the hallway without looking back, the sound of the music fading with every step until all I could hear was the quiet echo of my own shoes against the polished floor, the same floor I had walked across earlier that afternoon, feeling proud, nervous, hopeful, believing I was arriving for one of the happiest days of my life. The lobby was almost empty now, just the soft hum of the front desk computer and the faint smell of coffee from a machine near the corner. And the silence felt strange after the noise of the ballroom, like the world had slowed down enough for me to finally hear my own thoughts without interruption. I stopped near the large window facing the parking lot and set my purse on the small table beside it, resting my hands on the edge for a moment as I looked outside at the rows of cars, each one belonging to someone inside, celebrating, laughing, dancing, living a night they would remember as perfect. For the first time since the reception started, I let myself feel tired, not the kind of tired that comes from standing too long, but the kind that comes from holding on to something long after it has stopped holding on to you. I opened the purse again, slowly, and took the envelope out one last time, turning it over in my hands the way I had done all evening. But now the paper felt different, lighter somehow, as if the decision I had made in that ballroom had already taken some of the weight away. I thought about the morning when I wrote the check, sitting at my kitchen table with the sunlight coming through the window, telling myself that helping Daniel start his marriage without debt was exactly what his father would have wanted, exactly what we had worked for all those years. Back then the envelope felt like a gift. Now it felt like a choice. I opened it carefully and pulled the card out, reading the words I had written only hours before, telling him that family meant standing beside each other no matter what, telling him that love was not measured by money but by loyalty, by respect, by the way people treat each other when no one is watching. I stood there for a long time holding that card, listening to the distant sound of music through the walls, and I realized that the promise I made to my husband all those years ago had never been about paying for anything. It had been about raising a man who understood what family meant. And tonight, for the first time, I was not sure that promise had been kept the way I thought it had. I slid the card back into the envelope, but did not put the check back in. Instead, I folded the paper slowly, once, then again, until it fit inside my hand, and I placed the envelope back into my purse without it. My reflection in the window looked older than it had that morning, but it also looked steadier, like someone who had finally stopped waiting for permission to do what was right. I closed the purse, picked it up, and walked toward the front desk where the night manager was standing, looking up with a polite smile the way people do when they expect a simple question about directions or parking. I asked him if there was a quiet place where I could make a phone call, and he pointed toward a small sitting area near the elevators, telling me I could use it as long as I needed. I thanked him and walked over, sitting down in one of the chairs with the purse on my lap, taking out my phone and scrolling to a number I had not called in a long time, but still remembered without looking. When the call connected, I spoke calmly, the same way I always had when something important needed to be done, and I told the lawyer that the payment scheduled for tonight needed to be put on hold until I came into the office on Monday, that nothing should be finalized until I signed the papers myself. He asked if everything was all right, and I said yes, everything was exactly the way it needed to be. When I ended the call, I sat there for another moment, listening to the faint music from the ballroom upstairs, and I realized that for the first time that night, I did not feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally taking something back. I stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and picked up my purse, walking toward the doors without rushing, without hesitation, without looking back at the hallway that led to the celebration, because some nights are not meant to end with dancing. And some lessons are only learned when the music stops and you realize that respect is worth more than any gift you ever planned to give.